Damon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
On Mark Dolan tonight, it's a Conservative Party conference special. We'll be hearing from voices across the political spectrum in what will be a key few days for the future of this government. In the big question, can Liz Truss bounce back? And in the news agenda with my panel, is Labour's lead irreversible? Top Tory MP and Brexiteer Mark Francois is my Mark Meets guest, speaking to me live from Birmingham, the location of this year's conference. And in my big opinion, my message to Liz Truss is clear. Don't break, don't bend, and keep with your vision. You can make Britain great again. Plus tomorrow's papers and my all-star panel, a very busy 2 hours. It's our Tory Party conference special. I'll see you after the headlines with Tatiana Sanchez.
Thank you, Mark. This is the latest from the GB newsroom. The Prime Minister has admitted she should have laid the ground better for the government's mini-budget, which sparked days of financial market chaos. Speaking earlier on the BBC Sunday with Laura Kuenssberg, Liz Truss said she's standing by her tax-cutting plans and refused to rule out public spending cuts. She says she's learned from her mistakes, but has insisted the tax cuts would boost economic growth. Ms Truss also said the decision was made by Chancellor Kwasi Kwarteng and the Cabinet weren't told beforehand.
I do want to say to people that I understand their worries about what has happened this week, and I do stand by the package we announced, and I stand by the fact that we announced it quickly because we had to act. But I do accept we should have laid the ground better. I do accept that.
You accept you should have laid the ground better.
I have learnt from that. I have learnt from that, and I will make sure that in future we do a better job of laying the ground.
Meanwhile, former Cabinet Minister Michael Gove has criticised Liz Truss's package of tax cuts. He says the plans to pay for the cuts with increased borrowing were not Conservative.
I think that there is inherent risk, if you were a Conservative, in saying that you can borrow and borrow and borrow. This risk might pay off, but I am concerned by what it says about the core Conservative message of prudence. And the second concern that I have is that if we are to cut taxes, and I touched on it earlier, and there is a case, very good case, very respectable case, for relieving the burden on some, then it should not be people who are already wealthy.
Well, earlier today, the Tory party conference opened with tributes to Her Majesty the Queen. Party members stood for a minute's silence in memory of the late Queen Elizabeth. The Cabinet remained standing to sing the national anthem in praise of King Charles III. Tomorrow, the Chancellor is expected to make a speech on a day headlined as delivering a growing economy. A vigil has been held for the 125 people who were killed in Indonesia's stadium stampede. 323 people were also injured in the crash at a football match in the East Java province. Officers fired tear gas to try to control crowds after supporters of the losing home team invaded the pitch. As panic spread, thousands fled towards the stadium's exits, where many were suffocated. An investigation has been launched. TV online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News. Now it's back to Mark Dolan tonight.
Many thanks, Tatiana, and welcome to Mark Dolan tonight and a Conservative Party conference special. We'll be hearing from voices across the political spectrum in what will be a key few days for the future of this government. In the big question, can Liz Truss bounce back? We'll speak to former Tory Minister Anne Widdecombe, the co-founder of Vote Leave, an ex-Conservative and UKIP MP Douglas Carswell, and journalist and commentator Tim Montgomery, a former advisor to Boris Johnson and a man who knows the workings of the Tory party better than anyone. And in the news agenda with my panel, is Labour's lead irreversible? Plus, top Tory MP and Brexiteer Mark Francois is my Mark Meets guest, speaking to me live from Birmingham, the location of this year's conference. Reacting to the big political stories of the day are my panel of superstar musician Ben Ofwedu, Nigel Nelson, the political editor of the Sunday Mirror and the Sunday People, and best-selling author and columnist Emma Wolfe. Now I want to hear from you throughout the show, mark at gbnews.uk. And this programme has a golden rule. We don't do boring. Not on my watch. I just won't have it. So for the next 2 hours, big debates, big stories, big guests, and always big opinions. Let's start with this one. Let me tell you a little story. When the advertising guru Maurice Saatchi struck out alone to start his new advertising agency called M&C Saatchi, as he walked through the grand marble reception area of the company's new HQ, the firm's accountant was with him. And the accountant said, "Boss, we have no clients yet, and we can't afford these expensive offices." Saatchi leant into the accountant and said, "Sometimes you grow because you have to." For better or for worse, that is going to be the abiding theme of this new government and Liz Truss. It normally takes decades to transform a country. Well, she's got 2 years. She's had a tumultuous start. Moments after arriving at number 10, she had to deal with the passing of our greatest ever and longest-serving monarch. She takes up her job in the context of a war in the East with Vladimir Putin and an economic crisis as the result of, yes, the war, but mainly policies pursued during the pandemic, especially lockdown. The scale and complexity of her in-tray is without limits. And while she campaigned on a ticket of lowering taxes to win the leadership, her emergency budget on Friday, the 23rd of September, backfired spectacularly, sparking an explosion in the cost of government borrowing and a collapse in the value of the pound. Plenty of media commentators and a good few in her own party believe that she's now reached the point of no return. Some speculating she could be out by Christmas. Rubbish. It's far too soon for the public or her party to make their mind up about Liz Truss. In the end, it strikes me that the real crime of that budget statement was that it was honest. Honest that you can deliver public services and frankly expect the way of life that we currently enjoy in a world of artificially low interest rates, unprecedented borrowing and anemic growth. It ain't going to happen. Liz Truss is no public speaker. Oscar Wilde, Winston Churchill or even Boris Johnson, she ain't. But Truss has something that old Boris sorely lacked, a willingness to be unpopular and to do what's right for the country. And we've seen just that from her days after her arrival in the top job. She's willing to be straight with the British people and she's willing to deliver a tough message, one which many don't want to hear, that Britain isn't working. Whether it's Labour or the Conservatives, we limp from one administration to the next with Prime Minister after Prime Minister elected on a have your cake and eat it promise, which is in fact a lie. We now have a Prime Minister that's willing to tell us things that we don't want to hear, a precious and rare commodity in a politician. We don't want to hear that public spending is too high, and the more we put into the NHS, the worse it seems to get. We don't want to hear that inequality sadly exists, but that we're reliant on the tax receipts of the wealthiest in this country, 1% of whom contribute 30% of all taxes to the Treasury. We don't want to hear that interest rates at 0.5% are not possible long-term in a healthy, normally functioning economy. Liz Truss is many things, and one of them is honest. She even admitted on Breakfast TV today that she could have laid the groundwork for this budget better. Getting a nod from the Office for Budget Responsibility would likely have prevented the crash in the value of the pound. It was politically foolish, economically naive, and a damaging oversight. But the pound has recovered, borrowing costs have dropped, and with the global cost of energy coming down, her mini budget, which rightly offers protection for businesses and households this winter with their energy bills, is likely going to cost a lot less than anticipated. Plus, inflation has likely peaked, so fears about spiralling interest rates on mortgages next year are wide of the mark. They've spiked, and that's scary. Tell me about it. But there's every chance they'll go the other way when a better inflation outlook becomes clear. In my view, this financial statement, which had to be rushed out quickly, was a failure not of policy, but of communication. And in that, Truss must improve. But the vision is right. And after the polish of Tony Blair and the bravado of Boris Johnson, I'm actually ready for an ordinary public speaker, a no-frills but effective Prime Minister who says it like it is. For decades now, our governments have been asleep at the wheel, managing long-term decline as a result of tax and spend policies which have produced mediocre growth and the highest tax burden on businesses and individuals for 70 years. And the top rate of tax should go. Labour have politicised this outrageously, but the top rate tax cut will cost between £2 billion a year or nothing, or could even bring money in, say some economists, as more people are willing to go up the pay scale without fear of being clobbered by HMRC. And rich foreigners are more likely to come here because of our favourable tax terms. Getting rid of the banker's bonus will allow us to steal the best banking talent from around the world and fill the Treasury coffers. And even if the top rate tax cut did cost £2 billion a year, that's a cheap advert to encourage enterprise in this country and to fire the engines of the British economy. Don't forget, we wasted £2 billion a month on worthless testing during the pandemic for a virus that was everywhere at that point. No complaints from Labour then. We should be love-bombing the rich, not attacking them, and sending them abroad, which is what happens if you crank up taxes. I want their cash, don't you? It's time for Britain to think big, and that was the nature of this mini-budget, and I believe is the nature of Liz Truss. Throwing caution to the wind, she rushed out that statement, and yes, she could have changed the timings of various announcements, and she could have made her life easier politically by not cutting that top rate. But she's got a pair of balls on her, and she means business. She knows the difference between a popular policy and the right policy. And she has that in common with her political hero and a woman she's emulated many times. Margaret Thatcher, who for her sins and her many mistakes transformed the fortunes of this country, from being the sick man of Europe to an economic, political, diplomatic and military powerhouse. Well, Thatcher was wildly unpopular between elections, and her budgets in the early 80s caused outrage not just in the media and from the opposition, but from her own backbenches too. But she had a plan and it paid off. And she didn't hang around in delivering it, and neither is Truss. This week at conference, our new Prime Minister must double down. Post-pandemic and post-Brexit, she has a rare and historic opportunity to change the direction of this country for the better, to make Britain the most attractive, investable country in the world, a magnet for homegrown and global entrepreneurship. The Office for Budget Responsibility will publish their initial response to the mini-budget in just a few days, with a full report in November, by which time the potential cost of energy bailouts will be projected to be a fraction of what it was once feared. This mini-budget will be more effective than first thought, less expensive than first thought, and more of a no-brainer than first thought. If in 2 years' time, when Truss goes to the polls, if she can demonstrate that Britain avoided recession whilst the Eurozone sinks into the red, if she can demonstrate that a brain drain of talent from Paris, Frankfurt and Munich to business-friendly Britain all happened as a result of a simplified and lower tax regime for high achievers, if she can demonstrate the British economy is on a long-term path to robust growth, not tax and spend, then she will win. She will not only reverse that 30-point poll deficit to Labour, she'll be 30 ahead. My message to Liz Truss is a clear one. She's got to stand her ground. Don't buckle, don't bend, and keep being straight with the British people. We haven't had political courage on this scale for decades, and it might just be the making of us. Most people think the mini-budget was a disaster. The vast majority do. Among the public, the political establishment and the market. But that's the madness of crowds, the stampede of the herd in panic. And history judges that it's often the lone voice which is the wisest, and fortune favours the brave. I think this mini-budget will be a surprise hit in time and could pave the way for election glory. It's my view Liz Truss has got this right, but no one knows it yet. Least of all, Sir Keir Starmer, who's ordering red curtains for number 10. Not so fast, I say. You turn if you want to. Labour's not returning. Now, what do you think? My email is mark@gbnews.uk. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Let's get the opinions now of my panel. Superstar singer Ben Ofwedu, Fleet Street's longest-serving political editor Nigel Nelson from the Sunday Mirror and The People, and best-selling author and columnist Emma Wolfe. Emma, what do you think? This budget and Liz Truss have been written off too soon.
Convinced me. I don't know if Liz Truss is paying you. I started off that monologue furiously disagreeing with you. And I'm coming round to your way of thinking. Maybe we need to give it a chance. You know, I just didn't understand why. We needed emergency action. We needed emergency action on energy prices from the Chancellor and the new Prime Minister. But we didn't need this strange mini-budget that was absolutely rushed out with, as you say, very, very poor communication, both within Number 10 and without. It seemed as though this ideological project that Kwasi Kwarteng and Liz Truss had been hatching for years was sort of suddenly thrown into action. And that seemed like a mistake. But, you know, yes, if it works, then let's give her a chance. We don't have many other options.
I think we really need to deal with this top-rate tax debate because Labour are up in arms about it. They're talking about tax cuts for the rich. The bottom line is that politically it's very brave to do that. The Tories are not winning friends by cutting the top rate of tax, but they're trying to grow the economy and attract international talent. Emma.
Why not talk to your cabinet about it?
Well, the bottom line is that...
Is it a secret?
You don't really debate the budget with your cabinet, do you?
I think you talk to your senior team. I think you talk to your colleagues. But yeah, in fact, I think you should, and I think you do. It seemed really odd. And you talk about communication as though it's just sort of, OK, the communication was poor, but the message is right. But that's fairly crucial. And you have to admit that mini-budget with the public, look at the polls, has gone down like, you know, a bucket of cold sick.
Well, look, I mean, I think it was politically damaging to cut that top rate, Emma, but we've got to think big, haven't we? The top rate of tax in America is around 37%. It's time for Britain to be competitive. Don't you want rich people to come here, spend their money here, invest here and pay their taxes here?
I suppose ideologically that makes sense. I just have a problem with the rich getting richer and the poor getting poorer, and that's how it seems to me at the moment, and that's how it seems to a lot of people at the moment.
That's the headline, but we need to go beyond that. What if it makes the economy bigger?
Yeah, OK. It makes me feel uncomfortable that, you know, bankers' bonuses are being, allowed to inflate and people are paying less tax when actually they should be paying more, and people are really, really struggling to heat their homes.
Well, it makes Emma uncomfortable, Nigel Nelson, and it actually makes many of my viewers uncomfortable and voters at the next election. Do you think the Tories can get past this tax cut for the rich?
Well, not very easily, no. I mean, the first thing is it won't improve the economy. That the best kind of estimates for this tax cut are growth rates of about 0.4%. She's talking about getting growth rates up to 2.5%, and tax cuts just don't do it. They just don't work. I mean, the whole thing about the 45p, that I was sitting above the Chancellor in the House of Commons press gallery as he delivered that. I didn't know that the pound was going to tank. I didn't know the markets were going to go haywire. But the moment he actually announced that 45p, I thought, what on earth is he doing? He's completely bonkers. Nobody asked for this. No one was campaigning for it. There was no need to go and do it. And the idea that during a cost of living crisis, you end up giving multimillionaires a bung of at least £175,000 is politically and economically stupid. You made the point. It only costs about £2 billion. It's not a huge cost with everything else that's going on. But half that £1 billion goes to 2,500 millionaires. Now, surely at a time like this, that can't be right. And that's why the voters are understandably so damn angry about it.
However, we've got this figure, Nigel, of $2 billion, but it's been argued by some economists the tax cut could be cost neutral because many people will actually get a bigger income for not having the extra tax, clobbered by HMRC, that more people will go north of 150 in their salary, and therefore there'll be a bigger tax take. So it could be cost neutral. It could bring more money in. Surely it's worth a try.
Well, I mean, you're absolutely right, that there is a chance that it does bring more money in. But even that would be a drop in the ocean. You're talking about spending at the moment, or borrowing at the moment, of about 150 billion, maybe 200 billion. At most, if everything goes well, the kind of tax take you would expect over the next 5 years is about 6 billion. That's just not enough to actually kickstart the economy, which is what Liz Truss is promising to do.
Although, Benefuedu, it's also about messaging, isn't it? To say, come and live in Britain, come and invest here, and if you're based in the UK, grow your business here and make something of your life.
Yeah, definitely. I think so. I think that people are just so used to so many lies, and that whole thing that you talked about in your monologue with Prime Ministers just, they'll give you out free chickens or everyone gets, free Wi-Fi and all that sort of stuff, those kind of things. People are used to that dialogue, and when someone comes along and does something real and thinks about the bigger picture, it just shocks everyone. We're looking at something that's actually going to work. I mean, I'm not, hugely political, but it all kind of makes a lot of sense to me at a basic level. And you do want rich people to spend their money here, to feel comfortable here and not to run off abroad and spend their money elsewhere. And that will kickstart the economy. I mean, it's a simplistic way of thinking about it, but I think that it will work. And I think that all the other stuff that Prime Ministers have been promising, I think people are just so used to hearing loads and loads of rubbish that never really works. And as you can see, it's not worked in the last, 5 or 6 years. That they're just shocked at this thing. But like you say, the pound is regaining its strength. And I think people will come around to the idea.
Well, yes, I mean, Benefuedu, it's not going to be good news for the Eurozone if Britain is a low-tax haven in which bankers can come and make unlimited bonuses. They will leave Munich, they will leave Paris, they will leave Frankfurt, and they'll come to the UK.
Yeah, no, they definitely will.
What's not to like?
Yeah, I don't know. I just know that basically I'm not like I say, I don't know all the figures and taxes, but it just makes common sense to me. And it's the first time I've seen someone make common sense. I mean, Boris is great with the way he chats and stuff like that, and he'll add a bit of poetry into it and this and that. But a lot of the things he did, apart from the rollout of the vaccine, didn't really kind of work for him. And this, I'm prepared to give this one a trust. And I do think, give this one a trust, excuse the pun there.
No, nicely done. That's far better than my puns. Keep those coming. Look, I think you'll agree we're travelling business class with my panel tonight. They'll return later in the hour with our first news agenda before 10. And I'll be asking them, is Labour's lead now irreversible? Is Keir Starmer out of sight? We'll discuss that shortly. And my Mark Meets guest after 10 is Conservative MP and author Marc Francois. But next, in the big question, can Liz Truss bounce back? We'll discuss that with Anne Widdecombe, Tim Montgomery and Douglas Carswell. See you in 2.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christie's. I'm not here to mess around. With all the biggest topics and guests, you will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Well, a big response to my big opinion monologue. How about this from Marion? Well done, Mark. Great show. Why is it bad to get wealthy by honest means? No one's talking about the extremely wealthy Sir Tony Blair. How did he create so much wealth for himself and his family? Perhaps he's worth looking at, or is it okay if you're a lefty to be rich? It's the politics of envy against the right. It's so short-sighted by the lefty supporters, says Marion, who's not pulling her punches tonight. Evening Mark, says Philip. The two mistakes that Kwasi Kwarteng made in the mini-budget are he should have increased personal allowances from £12,500 to £20,000 and not allow bankers' bonuses till every penny of the billions we bailed the banks out with are actually paid back. The 45% tax rate for earnings over 150k should have remained at the moment. Great show, best regards. Well, look, Phil, thank you for emailing us. And Phil describes himself as an ex-Conservative member. I wonder if that group has grown in the recent times. Clive says, Dear Mark, why don't they say that if the 40% tax ban does not realise extra money into the Treasury within 2 years, we'll reintroduce the 45% rate and also backdate it and recover the back tax? What a creative idea. Clive for Chancellor. And Richard says, Mark, around 20 million people will have their mortgages rocket up by hundreds of pounds per month immediately after the mini-budget. So how will the UK grow if nobody's got any spare cash to buy anything? Businesses will collapse as a result of lack of demand. Richard, a fair point, and interest rates certainly are a concern, although I would humbly suggest that inflation in this country may have peaked, but here's hoping. It's time now for this. Yes, it's time now for the big question in which we tackle a major news story of the day. Tonight, as Tory party conference kicks off in Birmingham, we have a simple question. Can Liz Truss bounce back? To debate this, I'm delighted to welcome former Conservative Minister Anne Widdecombe, the co-founder of Vote Leave and ex-Conservative and UKIP MP, Douglas Carswell, and journalist and commentator and former advisor to Boris Johnson, Tim Montgomery. Tim, let me start with you. Can Liz Truss bounce back?
She can, Mark, if she first of all hires you as her speechwriter. I think your argument for the measures that she made, just over a week ago was one of the best that I've heard. But she's not making that argument, really. The interviews that she gave on BBC local radio last week, after she disappeared for 6 days, she was saying, talking about the energy price cap and trying to pretend that what had caused the turbulence in the markets was her intervention to cap the energy prices that were facing people. What people cannot stand with politicians, and this is the one area where I disagreed with what you said, was if they aren't straight with people. You've got Douglas Carswell and Anne Widdecombe on with me tonight. Those are two straight-talking politicians. They're politicians that people admire for that reason. Liz Truss hasn't been straight with people up until now. She hasn't really made the case for what she's doing. She's hidden in all sorts of convoluted ways behind the energy price cap. If she makes the intellectual case for what she's doing, she has a chance. I think it's uphill struggle now, but she has a chance.
And Anne Widdecombe, she's between a rock and a hard place, isn't she? Because if she scraps the 45p tax cut, well, then she'll win favour with some of her backbenchers and the country and the press. But on the other hand, she's done a U-turn. What do you think she should do?
Favours from any of those groups by reversing anything. If she goes into reverse on any of these measures, then the Conservative government will look even more chaotic than it already looks, and people will think they don't know what they're doing. So I think it's crucial that she sticks with what she's doing. I also think it's crucial that she explains it properly. Now, I think you did, and you did it very well. But what we lose sight of, amidst all the politics of envy and all the rest of it, what we lose sight of is that those of us, and I class myself in this because I did for years, who draw our salaries from the public purse, that's the teachers, the NHS workers, the politicians, we all draw our money. We don't make a darn penny for the country. What actually makes our economy, the businesses, the risk takers, the exporters, the money makers, and the city, which, as I said last time, brings in scores of billions of pounds annually in taxes. Now, these are the people who actually make the money. And to facilitate that, they need the incentives. And I think you're absolutely right. Europe has still got a banker's bonus cap. We now haven't. Therefore, we're at a competitive advantage. And anybody who says that it's wrong to put Britain at a competitive advantage, frankly, just isn't seeing the bigger picture. Now, where I do think she has gone badly wrong is not in what she did. It is in how she presented it. And she should have gone at that aggressively, not just from the first day, but from the very first minute after that budget. She and the Chancellor should have been out there aggressively saying this is what we're doing and this is why we're doing it. But they didn't do that, so everybody comes out with the usual propaganda line, you're helping the rich to get richer. You're helping the country to get richer. Wakey, wakey.
Wakey, wakey indeed. Is there any way back for Liz Truss, Douglas Carswell?
I do think she not only can bounce back, I think she will bounce back. And I think there are three reasons why I think Liz Truss supporters should be optimistic. Number one, her analysis of what we need to do is absolutely right. Interest rates need to go up and taxes need to go down. And other countries around the world are going to follow what Britain has done, whether they're forced to do it or do it out of necessity. Her basic approach of lower taxes and essentially higher interest rates is unavoidable. The second reason I think she will bounce back is because I think she speaks the truth. There is something dysfunctional about the country. We've had what you might call ghost growth for many, many years, and it's not really sustainable. It's a conjuring trick created by artificially low interest rates. And I'm afraid that ghost growth needs to be replaced by real growth. The third reason politically why I think she could actually be in a stronger position is paradoxically because expectations are now so low. When the pound doesn't slump to 80 cents in the dollar, or when the cost of gas does begin to come down, I think actually because expectations are so low, I think actually she will be seen as exceeding them, which I think is always a good thing for a politician.
Do you think that the policies from that mini budget will have time to kick in before the next election, Douglas?
Possibly not, but I can't help noticing that people tend to vote for left-wing lunatic governments when they're feeling rich. When times are tough, you can't afford that. And people vote for Conservatives to fix them. Remember Margaret Thatcher in 1981, a budget that was almost universally condemned by people. People stuck with her. because the country had run out of alternatives and because she was someone with a plan. And I think those factors, again, will play to Liz Truss's advantage. The country's not going to be out of this mess in 2 years' time. We may not even be out of this mess in 5 or 10 years' time. But the alternative is to follow the remedies that George Osborne and Gordon Brown and Mark Carney have advocated for. And that's simply going to kick the debt can down the road and cause more problems. So I think if, like Margaret Thatcher, she plays on this idea that there is no alternative. She's going to do things that are unpopular. She's admitted that. But I think if she's honest about that, the country will stick with her.
Yes, Tim, you know the inner workings of the Conservative Party very well. A former advisor to Boris Johnson who didn't need any tips on performance or communication. But the bottom line is this mini budget may have prevented Britain from having a deep recession. A simple message. When do you think Liz Truss will get her act together in terms of getting her point across?
Well, I think she's had a rude awakening. You know, this is probably the worst start for a prime minister in modern history. You know, she has gone from having the goodwill of the British people. The British people are not unreasonable. When there's a new prime minister come in, you know, they want them to succeed. You know, this is a crisis time for the country. They want the country to succeed. And because she has perceived, let's just look at the perception for the moment. You know, we can argue about why she's got into this position. But because she's looked like she's put people's pension and mortgages at risk, she's gone from that sort of fair start to a 33% deficit in the opinion polls. And I think the first thing she needs to do is be more collegiate. I think there's been an attitude that she's displayed where I think she thinks she knows it all. You know, she didn't really, I backed Liz Truss rather than Rishi Sunak, but there are talented people who back Rishi Sunak. She included almost none of them in her cabinet, and she should have done that. She needs to listen more. She can't run an economy and a government as complex as Britain's without listening to all the best advice around her, and she hasn't done that yet.
Interesting email, Anne Widdecombe, from my viewer Richard, who says around 20 million people will have had their mortgages rocket up by hundreds of pounds a month immediately after that mini budget. So how will the UK grow if nobody's got any spare cash to buy anything?
Well, first of all, I don't think we appreciate just how unusual it has been for us to have the very long run that we've had of extremely low inflation, extremely low interest rates. I mean, I'm old enough to remember the 70s when mortgages went up to a 15% interest rate. You know, people forget that. So the very fact that this has happened now doesn't mean that it's going to be sustained as jitters calm and nerves calm. I was only worried at one point because I thought that pension funds were being quite badly affected. But quite honestly, if you look at what's behind that, and I appreciate the general public don't, there was already some pretty risky trading that caused that. So, or that helped to cause that. So the question is, though, from the viewer, you know, if people are having to spend more, as they will, despite all the help on energy and on mortgages, etc., where does the money come from to spend? The answer is that if the economy is growing, then those factors actually improve. And then people do have the money to spend. So the crucial thing is to get the economy moving. And the fact is that if we stuck with the policies, Rishi Sunak's and all the rest of it, those policies that we've now had for years, we will carry on being where we have been for years, which is not getting anywhere. And we should always remember that when Mrs. Thatcher introduced a highly controversial budget, 364 economists signed a letter saying it was a disaster, and it actually kick-started Britain, who had been the sick man of Europe, kick-started us until we were the envy of Europe. And so I would say, let's look at what is happening, give this a chance. Because if, for example, if a business starts to make more money as a result of this, they can afford pay rises for their employees. The employees can afford to buy things. These things are not static. You don't just take one effect and say this is going to completely kibosh the economy, this one effect. Not at all. There are many interacting effects, and that's what your correspondent should understand.
Do you know Liz Truss well, Anne? Because I wanted to ask you whether your judgment is that she's got the personal grit and character to see this through.
I don't know her well. In fact, bluntly, I don't know her at all. And indeed, I'm no longer a member of her party, so I'm not likely to get to know her. From what I've seen so far, she is more than capable of sticking to a course, and that is admirable. But she does have to learn to explain what she is doing. And it is not a sign of weakness to explain what you're doing. It is actually respect, simple respect for those who are worried. Now, the vast majority of the public, not all, the vast majority of the public don't go in for highly detailed economic analysis. They take their opinions from the screaming headlines. And that, I think, is what this government has got to learn to counter. And so far, they're not showing much sign of it.
Douglas Carswell, you're in the United States now as an academic, but you were a Conservative MP before becoming Britain's first and only UKIP MP. If you were one of those Tory backbenchers now, worried about their seat at the next election, what would your emotions be?
I'd be 100% behind Liz Truss. I've known Liz for 20, 25 years. She appointed me as a non-executive of the Department of Trade when she was Trade Minister. She's quietly, in a very unflashy way, very resolute. She has a clear commitment to the free market, a clear understanding, I think, that ghost growth engineered by central bankers creating artificially low interest rates doesn't make us wealthy. What we need is real, authentic growth, real, authentic wealth creation. And that doesn't happen simply by sloshing around yet more credit. What that, in fact, does is it leads to greater social inequality, because it means people with assets, whether it's houses or shares or hedge funds, become super, super, super rich. And ordinary folk like the people I represented in Clacton are left straggling behind. So I actually think she's on the side of the kind of C2 voters who were the core of the Thatcher coalition. And I think in time they will rally to her. And in time people will recognise that she represents a real sea change in this country's fortunes. For the first time since November 1990, I think we have an authentically free market Conservative government in Downing Street.
That was very much, Douglas, the thrust of my big opinion monologue, the first honest and authentic politician we've had in decades. So you would agree with her on policy direction, but has she got the performance chops and the political nous to see this through? Is she a good enough communicator, and is she a smart enough politician?
Look, I spent a great deal of my time in the House of Commons trying to undermine a deeply misguided Tory front bench. But I think as a backbencher on this, you need to get behind Liz Truss. And yes, it's true that the presentation of this was imperfect. Yes, it's true they need help. That's what you're there for in the House of Commons. Rally behind Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng. Because let's be clear about this. The alternative to this is a left-wing, ultra-socialist government of Keir Starmer, who incidentally will reform the electoral system, so your seat will be gone forever.
You're shaking your head, Tim Montgomery?
I am, because I don't think the Conservative Party can get behind Liz Truss at the moment, because she's trying to do things. You can cut the top rate of tax, of course you can, but you can't cut the top rate of tax at the same time you're cutting people's benefits. That's the sort of political act that frightens people to death. So I do think there needs to be some amendment of the mini budget. There has to be a sense that we're a one-nation Conservative Party where we will look after everyone. I agree with what Douglas and Liz have been saying. There may well be some very substantial benefits from cutting the top rate of tax. But if people feel that the Conservative Party is the party of the rich, that's always been toxic. So it's not just a case of backbenchers getting behind what Liz Truss wants. It's also a question of Liz Truss listening to the party, listening to the wisdom of her colleagues, and governing for the whole country. And what we also have to be aware of, Mark, you've talked about her being very honest. There was a very clear manifesto at the last general election. It was the manifesto that won Boris Johnson a majority of nearly 80. It didn't have any talk of a bonfire of workers' rights. It didn't talk about cutting the top rate of tax. There is no mandate for what she is currently doing. So she has to have some sense of understanding where the country is and not taking it in a direction that it has not voted for.
Anne?
Yeah, no, I mean, is a nonsense, Tim. You look at the Thatcher manifestos. Now, this was Thatcher, and Thatcher was elected, not a successor, but Thatcher. You look at the manifestos. They didn't foreshadow half of what went on, the massive denationalisation, the huge privatisation programme. You actually look at those manifestos, and certainly the early ones were reasonably tame. But as they got into office and got control, they did things. Now, that is what Liz should be doing. He's been elected by the party, and that is what she should now be doing. And you can point to umpteen governments of both parties doing things that were never in the manifestos. They don't try and tie Liz down just to the manifesto. The only thing you mustn't do is break a clear promise.
Douglas, I'll come to you in just a moment. Do you want to respond to that, Tim? Go on.
Tim said that if Liz Truss wants to govern, she should govern as a one-nation Conservative. Listen, if we carry on with the establishment orthodoxy on energy policy, on net zero, and on ultra-low interest rates, Britain will be a no-nation country. Britain won't be able to even heat itself, let alone have basic day-to-day functionality as a state. So it's critical that these changes are made and made quickly. As for this whole obsession with the 45p rate, listen, let's not be so parochial in the conversation in Britain. I'm talking to you from the United States, where the highest rate of taxation that you pay is not only 37%, which is a good deal lower than 45, it only kicks in if you're earning $500,000 a year. Now, that is the competition. That is where you've got to start thinking about how you create wealth. How are you going to compare to the United States? For years, Britain has looked across the channel at an even more parochial, inward-looking, stagnating bloc. You've got to cast your eyes to the wider world.
Tim?
Well, what I would say to you, Douglas, is a lot of Conservatives, I'm afraid, are very interested in the marginal tax rate that the rich face. What about people on benefits, people on universal credit? They lose 60, 70% of their money when they earn an extra pound. What I want the Conservative Party to be, and I know this is what you and Anne want as well, I know you're compassionate people, but this is not where Liz Truss has been. It's looked like we're worried about the marginal tax rate facing the rich, but not the marginal tax rate facing people at the bottom. And so if you're going to do something, which despite what Anne Widdecombe says, it's not that it wasn't in the manifesto, it's the opposite of what our manifesto said. If you're going to do something as bold as this, you have to take people with you. And that means you do the cuts for the people at the bottom of the pile in tax rates, as well as for people at the top.
The lady should always have the last word. Anne Widdecombe.
Yes. I don't believe that this is a contradiction of the manifesto. And you cannot say that Liz Truss has not helped the poor when we've had the energy cap, when we've had money put into that, when we've had huge expenditure on trying to support people. And there are some governments who would have said, well, this crisis is not of the government's making, and somehow we must get on with it. But Liz hasn't done that. She's actually put a lot of money into helping those who are on extremely straitened means. So I don't think she lacks compassion, but I do think that what she lacks is a decent public relations approach. She really does. Now, I'm not talking about a slick approach. I'm talking about just stopping long enough to explain why you're doing what you're doing.
A deeply absorbing conversation. Thank you for your collective viewpoints. Anne Widdecombe, Tim Montgomery and Douglas Carswell. What's your view? Mark at gbnews.uk. Can Liz Truss bounce back? Lots more to come. Also, I'd like you to vote in our GB News poll on Twitter. Let me know if you think that Liz Truss can recover ground against Labour. After 10, in Mark Meets, I'll be talking with a big beast of the Tory party and author of Spartan Victory, the inside battle for Brexit, Marc Francois, Conservative MP, live from Tory party conference in Birmingham after 10. We've got the papers at 10:30. with full panel reaction. And in my take at 10, I'll be discussing whether or not we should have tougher laws against marijuana. Hear my views on Britain's war on drugs after 10. But next with my panel, is Labour's lead irreversible? See you in 2.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around. With all the biggest topics and guests, you will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and tune-in apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other pay-per-review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
So funny when
a lot of responses coming into my big opinion monologue. This is from, let's have a look, Jimmy. And Jimmy says, Mark, great show and excellent monologue this evening. Keep up the good work. We're depending on you and GB News to keep it real and apply basic common sense. Well, thank you, Jimmy. Look, if you're enjoying the show, then do tell your friends, tell your family, and let's change the world together. Now, look, more of your emails to come, but let's have a look at some of the big stories of the day. And of course, it's all about politics at the moment. As you heard earlier, it's a big week for the Tories as Liz Truss aims to defend her controversial budget. It's all played into Labour's hands, and they've taken a massive lead in the opinion polls. Labour, who haven't been in power for over a decade, when Tony Blair steered them to 3 straight terms in office, now look likely to win the election, at least according to the polls. So is their lead irreversible, or is there a way back for Truss and the Tories? Nigel Nelson, no better man to ask. Is that lead irreversible now? Has the elastic limit been broken?
No, I mean, it's not irreversible. It's the old cliche about a week being a long time in politics. And if you look for the election is about 2 years away, that's sort of hundreds of years in politics. So anything can go wrong between now and then. However, what the Tories have just lost is their reputation for sound money. And that is going to take a lot of rebuilding, and that could last years. Unless she comes back from the back foot really quickly, she won't be able to do that, and Labour will carry on ahead. Now, their party conference in Liverpool, I was up there. I haven't seen a party conference like that since Tony Blair was around, and there was a real feeling of the whiff of victory in their nostrils, the spring in their step as they were going along, an almost faultless party conference, and the best speech the leader has given so far. All those things point to the fact that Labour is on its way back to power, but we know from events can come out of left field. We've had COVID, we've had the war in Ukraine. It doesn't mean that they'll actually win.
Are Labour and are the press and are we all underestimating Liz Truss's potential as a Prime Minister and her personal qualities?
Well, the one personal quality I think she's got is unlike most politicians, she does answer a straight question. So this morning, doing her keynote interview, she would answer yes or no or something like that to questions. Most politicians, as we all know, don't do that.
And she said to Laura Kuenssberg, I should have laid the groundwork for the budget
Yeah, she was
better.
actually admitting a mistake. Now, if she goes one stage further and says that mini-budget was a mistake and reverses that, she has a chance. If she doesn't do that, she's in real trouble, because the next stage will be public service cuts, and she is indicating she's going to cut benefits. Those two things could actually finish her long before we get to a general election. They'll finish her with a Tory party.
So if she doesn't scrap the top rate tax cut, then Labour's lead is irreversible. That would be the game changer for her, or that gives her a fighting chance.
I would put it slightly differently. I think that her premiership will come to an end. I don't think that her premiership can survive if she doesn't do something fundamental about the mistake she made. She's admitted the presentation was wrong. The reason all this has happened is because there's a loss of credibility. So on the basis of that, what she has to do at this conference is not worry about the election, worry about staying in number 10, because there are a lot of Tory MPs who are now plotting to get her out of it.
Last question to you before I get to the panel, which is it inconceivable that she could be out before the next election?
Yes.
Not possible. I mean, it's logistically possible.
It is conceivable she would be out by the next election. It is conceivable she'll be out by Christmas. I'm not saying she will be.
Percentage chance?
Sorry?
Percentage chance of that?
I would say with the number of Tory MPs who are so furious, you're probably looking at about 40% chance of that happening.
And the idea would be we've elected a dud, nip it in the bud, and we've still got 18 months to fix things.
Exactly, yeah.
And that would involve a change to the rules by which a leader is elected.
There are two ways of doing that. One would be a change, trying to get the rules changed, and I'm told around about 70 MPs are needed for that process to begin, to actually change the rules, have another no-confidence vote. That's one way. The other way, which is the interesting one Michael Gove seems to be suggesting, is that they all vote against this mini-budget. That's been considered to be a confidence issue, so they'll get thrown out from the party. That's what would happen to them. However, 40 of them vote against the mini-budget, government falls.
So that would be obviously pretty self-destructive. You have to wonder whether Rishi Sunak is sitting there thinking, maybe if I bide my time, I'll get the top job.
Yeah, he might be thinking that. No, I just think it'd be incredibly chaotic. I think Liz Truss's problem is just presentation, and we live in such a presentation time. Presentation is 9/10 of the law. That's what I think. And we live in such a media time, and like Anne Widdecombe said, no one's really that deep and analytical, not the general person. You just have to do it in layman's terms. And I just think that she's on the right track, and she just needs to speak to a good spin doctor or a good spinner and get her to explain herself.
But also, as I mentioned in my big opinion monologue, don't you think her slightly crappy delivery could be her strong point? Because we've had so many polished performers. And I wonder whether if she can sell herself as an ordinary, down-to-earth person, that could be a selling point.
But yeah, I think she's just a bit under the ordinary down-to-earth selling person. I think she's just not explaining herself properly. I think she's got to come up a little bit. She doesn't have to go as far as like Boris would go, where it'd be seamless and there'd be bits of poetry and Shakespeare and stuff like that. But I think she needs to come up a little bit and do it in layman's terms.
Emma, briefly, do you think that old Keir Starmer is measuring up red curtains for number 10?
I don't think any lead is ever irreversible. And as Nigel says, a lot can happen in 2 years if that's when the next election is. I think that, I think that the danger is when people like me start to think seriously, actually, about voting Labour. It's when people make that shift in their mind, and when you see those poll leads, that's pretty dangerous for the Tory party.
Yes, because people like to back a winner, don't they?
Because people like to back a winner. But I still think the front bench and I still think the Labour leader are lacking something major. If I were on the Labour front bench, I would be looking for a really inspiring leader that can really, grab the public's imagination. Because I think that Keir Starmer is still not landing with the public at all.
Okay.
He's still a bit of a blank.
He's got work to do. Well, let's have a look at that poll. Can Liz Truss bounce back? 45.5% say yes, Actually, Labour's lead irreversible. 54.5%, glad I'm not Chancellor, say no, Labour's lead is not reversible. Lots more to come after 10. In just a few minutes' time, my Mark Meets guest is a Conservative Party titan, Mark Francois, one of the architects of Brexit. Live from Tory Party conference, he joins us at the top of the next hour. Plus, in my Take at 10, I'll be dealing with drugs. It's time to get tough on those breaking the law. See you in 3.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around. With all the biggest topics and guests, you will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other pay-per-review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
It's 10 o'clock and this is Mark Dolan Tonight. My Mark Meets guest is one of the founding fathers of Brexit, Conservative MP and chair of the European Research Group of Eurosceptic MPs, Mark Francois. He joins us live from party conference in Birmingham. Plus, we got tomorrow's papers at exactly 10:30. After this, my take at 10. It's time to stop our addiction to marijuana. Sorry, folks, the drugs don't work. We've normalised the use of weed and cocaine, and it's got to stop. More on that shortly in my take at 10. Plus the papers, don't forget, and lots more big political stories. It is our Tory conference special. First, the headlines with Tatiana Sanchez.
Thank you, Mark. This is the latest from the GB newsroom. The Prime Minister has admitted she should have laid the ground better for the government's mini-budget, which sparked days of financial market chaos. Speaking earlier on the BBC's Sunday with Laura Kuenssberg, Liz Truss said she's standing by her tax-cutting plans and refused to rule out public spending cuts. She says she's learnt from her mistakes, but has insisted the tax cuts would boost economic growth. Ms Truss also said the decision was made by Chancellor Kwasi Kwarteng and the Cabinet weren't told beforehand.
I do want to say to people, I understand their worries about what has happened this week, and I do stand by the package we announced, and I stand by the fact that we announced it quickly because we had to act. But I do accept we should have laid the ground better. I do accept that.
You accept you should have laid the ground better.
I have learnt from that. I have learnt from that, and I will make sure that in future we do a better job of laying the ground.
Meanwhile, former Cabinet Minister Michael Gove has criticised Liz Truss's package of tax cuts. He says the plans to pay for the cuts with increased borrowing were not Conservative.
I think that there is inherent risk, if you were a Conservative, in saying that you can borrow and borrow and borrow. This risk might pay off, but I am concerned by what it says about the core Conservative message of prudence. And the second concern that I have is that if we are to cut taxes, and I touched on it earlier, and there is a case, very good case, very respectable case, for relieving the burden on some, then it should not be people who are already wealthy.
Earlier, the Tory party conference opened with tributes to Her Majesty the Queen. Party members stood for a minute's silence in memory of the late Queen Elizabeth. The cabinet remained standing to sing the national anthem in praise of King Charles III. Tomorrow, the Chancellor is expected to be making a speech on a day headlined as delivering a growing economy. And a vigil has been held for the 125 people who were killed in Indonesia's stadium stampede. 323 people were also injured in the crash at a football match in the East Java province. Officers fired tear gas to try to control crowds after supporters of the losing home team invaded the pitch. As panic spread, thousands fled towards the stadium's exits, where many were suffocated. An investigation has been launched. TV, online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News. Now it's back to Mark Dolan tonight.
My thanks to Tatiana Sanchez, who returns in an hour's time. Welcome to Mark Dolan tonight. Big stories, big guests, and always big opinions. My Mark Meets guest is one of the founding fathers of Brexit, Conservative MP and chair of the European Research Group of Eurosceptic MPs, Mark Francois. He joins us live from Birmingham, the host city of the Tory conference. Plus, we've got a new game show at the end of the programme. It's The Big Question Mark, and that is kind of all the big questions of the week. So we'll be testing your general knowledge about the big stories of the week in our quiz at the end of the show. We've got tomorrow's papers at exactly 10:30 with full panel reaction. But first, it's time for my take at 10. Put this in your pipe and smoke it. The Mail newspaper report that cannabis is just as harmful as cocaine and crack and should be classified as a Class A drug. This according to police chiefs. A group of Conservative police and crime commissioners will demand that the drug be put on a par with crack and cocaine. If adopted, the change would see the maximum penalties for possession increase from 5 to 7 years, and the maximum penalty for supplying cannabis would increase from 14 years in prison to a life jail sentence. I think this is an important moment in the national conversation around drugs. Public health and obesity were the big themes of last night's show. But people hoovering up recreational substances, filling their lungs and bloodstreams with narcotics, clearly isn't great for their health either. The use of marijuana has effectively been decriminalised in this country, leaving users exposed to the massive potential health risks of this mind-altering substance. Yes, booze can be just as bad for some, and there are plenty of people out there who can have a spliff whilst holding down a successful job and having a successful life. And for those with severe illnesses, marijuana can be a miraculous painkiller. But what the unlucky few who find getting stoned actually causes is profound psychological reactions, particularly the incredibly strong, often chemically enhanced skunk, as it's known, that often now goes into a joint. The problem we have in this country is that drug use has become normalised. Even the middle classes are at it, doing lines of cocaine with their high-flying chums. And of course, we know that the Colombian marching powder is a part of daily life in the Houses of Parliament. The genie is out of the lamp. I don't think you're going to stop the narcotics trade. The war on drugs has been lost. But at school, we've got to educate kids about the potentially life and health-altering impact of these illegal drugs. Yes, the hard stuff, crack and heroin, for example, but the supposedly mild stuff too, like ecstasy or grass. It's not ecstasy if you wind up in A&E or suffer reduced life chances or destroyed relationships because you can't get off the pills. Notwithstanding the link between marijuana use and mental conditions like schizophrenia and psychosis, There's a real risk that youngsters strung out on weed simply find their lives are going nowhere. No ambition, no energy, no impetus. Many preferring to just sit at home on the sofa, roll a spliff and get off their baps as they graze all day long on Mars bars, Diet Coke and Pringles. I had a stoner friend at university and his TV breakfast show was Countdown at 4 in the afternoon. I'm all for making dope as bad as crack and heroin because it diminishes lives. The message from the educators, the police and the government should be clear. Drugs are not good for you and they're not allowed in this country. They're against the law and the law should be enforced. The illegal trade in narcotics fuels gang crime and burglaries, hurts families, impacts mental and physical health, and damages society. And the smell from marijuana cigarettes is pungent and disgusting. The drugs don't work, and if you're on them, it's likely neither will you. Millions of people getting high is a new low for Britain. Should we get tougher when it comes to the enforcement of drugs? Should marijuana be treated like cocaine, crack and other tough narcotics? Mark at GBnews.uk reacting to my take at 10 and all of the big stories of the day. Superstar singer Ben Ofwedu, Fleet Street's longest-serving political editor, the brilliant Nigel Nelson, and best-selling author and columnist Emma Wolfe. Well, what do you think about this, Ben? Is it time to treat marijuana like Class A drugs?
Not sure about that. I wouldn't say that marijuana and cocaine are the same. They're both drugs, and obviously with marijuana, you know, it's scientifically proven that there's benefits of it. And, you know, and I know so many people who are doing so well, so many really famous and rich people who smoke marijuana, and it doesn't seem to affect them. I wouldn't put it in the same bracket as cocaine, not at all. So, yeah, I'm not sure. And in America, they're legalising it more and more and more, and it's a huge business over there. So I just think if they're going to legalise it and, you know, the doctors look over it and, you know, and people can get it for medical use and maybe recreational use if it's safe, I think they should more likely do that. Cocaine, I think, is on a completely different level. And I've seen cocaine ravage many lives. I haven't really seen that with marijuana. I'm not saying it's not dangerous, and I'm not saying that it can't bring on psychosis and maybe bring on schizophrenia in some cases. I've heard of things like that. But even if you go out to like the West Indies or parts of Africa, there's people who've been smoking marijuana for, you know, 80, 85 years. And you know, they're still sort of working and it doesn't really affect them. So, yeah, it's... yeah, I wouldn't class them as the same thing.
However, does marijuana not sap motivation, Ben?
I think it does different things for different people. I know myself, when I was a naughty youngster, I'm 50 years of age now, and when I was 19, I used to smoke marijuana, and one of the reasons I stopped it, because it stopped, you know, progression, and I wanted to be in the music business, and I would find that I'd want to make so many calls to record companies in the morning and stuff like that, and then by the end of the day, if I smoked a spliff, as it were, then, you know, the whole day would go to pot. Excuse the other pun as well. See?
That's a good one.
You like that? Yeah. So I found it didn't really work for me. There was one story with George Michael being in a courtroom, and the judge said, "Did he think marijuana was something really cool?" And he said, "Well, it depends who you are." He said, "If I was, you know, a young man trying to start my career up, maybe it's not that great, but now I'm here. I find it fine." You know, so it just works for different people. And like I say, I have experience. I know many people around me, incredibly successful, incredibly wealthy, who smoked a spliff, you know, sort of like 5 o'clock every afternoon, and it hasn't seemed to have affected them.
What about the smell, Ben?
Marijuana is a funny smell. It's the one smell that is distinctive and everyone kind of likes it. Really weird. I mean, more often than not, more people like it. I mean, I don't like the smell of cigarettes and stuff like that. Another thing I used to smoke back in the days. But marijuana, people kind of like it. And even if they don't smoke it and have never smoked it, they kind of like it. So it doesn't really particularly bother me. I just don't smoke because it never worked for me personally.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to accidentally get high, Ben, when I'm walking down the street. Do you know what I mean? You do get occasionally a blast of it, don't you? And if it was completely decriminalised, that smell would be everywhere.
Yeah, I don't know if you get high on fumes. I think that's a bit of a myth. I know there's a lot of people like to think that. I think you might get high on inhalation if you were very, very close, but I don't think you get high on fumes, you know. And also, you know, cannabis has so many things of marijuana, you know, that you can take out just the resin, and that's the part that they use CBD oil and stuff like that, which is very good for you, and that's taking out the hallucinogen out of it. So it can be broken down into different parts and stuff like that. I think a lot of people, yes, smoking a spliff can sort of cure pain and stuff like that, but really it's the resin that you can take in which does it, and it doesn't have the hallucination or the hallucinogen in it.
Fair enough. What do you think about this, Emma Wolf? Should we treat marijuana like Class A drugs?
No, I'm afraid I agree with Ben. There's absolutely, you know, they are different. They are different, completely different drugs. Cocaine is so much more damaging. I think that it's really... Marijuana is very much like alcohol in the way that some people can, you know, enjoy a couple of glasses of wine and that's fine, and they can enjoy alcohol as part of their life, and some people go to excess. Like Ben, I may have had more than several spliffs during my teenage years and at university and things like that, and then in my 20s when I was working, I just found that it was no longer part of my life. I was lucky. I also know people, though, at university who became extremely unwell, and skunk was just coming in at this time. They became extremely unwell. One person I know became, you know, really quite psychotic and, you know, developed schizophrenia. So it is a dangerous drug. It's everywhere. I live in, you know, centre of London. It is everywhere. You walk down the street, people are openly smoking it. We all know that. You can smell it from a mile off. But I don't think that it is helpful to equate it with things like cocaine, things like ecstasy, things like, you know, much, much, much stronger drugs. And there are some very, very strong drugs out there.
But why is it wrong to equate it with cocaine if smoking marijuana could send a teenager to A&E with a psychotic episode?
Well, a bottle of scotch could actually send a teenager to A&E with a psychotic episode. So I tend to agree with Ben and with Emma that I don't think it's on a par with cocaine, heroin and other drugs. So on that basis, then, there should be a differentiation between how serious they are. And if you want to make cannabis a Class A drug, then I would argue that it would be ludicrous not to make gin, vodka, whiskey, also a Class A drug. Where I think you were right, Mark, is where you talked about, let's have a national conversation about this. That's what we've been lacking. A lot of police officers say it shouldn't be a criminal matter, it should be a public health matter. If you were to turn it into a public health matter, and you were able to legalise drugs and tax them, as happens in America, you'd have enough money to treat the people who suffered because of drugs.
Yes, although, Nigel, we couldn't suggest, could we? We can't imply that marijuana is somehow good for you. And I mentioned it's a good application for people with certain illnesses, and for them it should be available, absolutely. But smoking marijuana is not good for you.
No, of course it's not, Mark.
So why encourage it by being so lax with the enforcement of the law around it?
Well, if we're going to go down that road, then we should be banning cigarettes as well, that we know that cigarettes aren't good for you. Alcohol in excess is not good for you. There are all sorts of things we can ban, but the idea that marijuana is any worse than those things, I don't think the evidence is there. You're right about skunks. Skunks obviously a lot more dangerous and can be addictive. Point I'm making there is, let's make it a public health issue so we can help the people who do fall foul of these drugs.
Although my other concern, Nigel, is that it's harder to detect if somebody's been smoking marijuana, isn't it? You know, it's very difficult to go into an office having had a few pints in the pub and not get noticed. Whereas you can have people in a professional setting who are slightly stoned. They might be at the wheel of a car. It could be a police officer or some other professional, a school teacher perhaps, or even a student. And that's another problem with marijuana, that it's hard to detect.
I'm not sure that's true, actually.
No, I don't agree. I can smell it a mile off. If someone's had a spliff and they walk back into the office, I think it's a bit more obvious than if they've had a line of coke in the lavatory.
And you can spot somebody who's high, so you can find out that way. It just seems that, again, we're back on the same, trying to equate it with alcohol. If someone comes back drunk to the office, that should be a disciplinary offence. If they come back stoned to the office, the same thing.
And how can you tell if someone's stoned? Do they start writing songs or poetry or something?
Yeah, probably. Yeah, I think a lot of musicians do use spliffs as a way into, like, you know, because you can hear it turns up the bass in certain things, and a lot of people use it. It goes hand in hand with a lot of musicians. That's probably why I know so much about it. But you can just tell if someone's stoned because it smells, basically.
And
because they're sitting back in their chair eating Pringles.
But one final point on this, Emma, which is that the only other issue as well is that it's unusual for people to have a few pints at 11 a.m. You've probably got a problem if you are. Most people wait until they've finished work, they drink in the evening. The issue with marijuana is it's very often consumed throughout the day, and that's another big concern, isn't it?
It is, yeah, look, it is amongst, say, maybe a university student will wake up and have a spliff or something, but actually the average person is not going to be smoking throughout the day if they've got stuff they need to get done. Maybe they will at weekends, but those are the people that can probably just about cope with it, that can probably just, you know, that they're a little bit monged all the time. But that's
right,
but they're able to live like that, and it works in their lifestyle. I actually think alcohol does a lot more damage, and I know we go on about it, but things like destroying families, destroying, you know, people's finances, destroying relationships, causing domestic abuse. Come on, you know that alcohol causes that kind of damage, and we're not cracking down on that.
Well, the Mayor of Amsterdam wants a temporary ban on non-residents in coffee shops by enforcing a national residents-only rule. Apparently, British tourists are some of the worst-behaved tourists in Amsterdam. So it does beg the question, let me put this to you, Emma. Brits abroad, are we a national embarrassment? We can't even be trusted with marijuana in Holland.
I thought, yeah, look, I think this is a bit ridiculous. I think, you know, Amsterdam welcomes the tourism trade, and, you know, if they get rid of their coffee shops, they're going to... It's a beautiful city. There's a lot more to do there than just sitting around inside some smoky coffee shop. But it is a big draw, and I think that it would be a real mistake to get rid of it. It's what they're known for, and lots of people do. You know, Americans come abroad and they do Amsterdam as part of their European tour. I don't know whether we're still a national embarrassment. Wherever I go abroad, people say, "Oh, you're English. Oh, that's so lovely," and you know.
Yeah. Do you ever get told off about Brexit when you're on the continent, Emma?
No, I tend not to, actually.
Glad to hear it. Nigel, what do you think? Are Brits still an embarrassment abroad?
Well, I find them so. I mean, I tend to holiday in places where I'm unlikely to encounter too many Brits. I mean, I do think that some of the scenes that we've seen in places like the Mediterranean, Costa del Sol, where Brits go over there just to get drunk, just to get laid, I think that, yes, then we become an embarrassment. But when it comes down to Amsterdam and the coffee shops, it seems to me that they would be cutting off their nose to spite their face, that they make a lot of money out of it. I can imagine residents get fed up with the fact they're there, but that's locals using it. So if Holland wants to change its laws, I would understand that. But as long as they are open and legal, I think tourists should be able to use them.
Yeah, you do wonder about Brits abroad, don't you, Ben? It always seems to be Brits who fall off balconies, get drunk in bars, and now get banned from marijuana cafes in Amsterdam.
Yeah, I think Brits abroad are a bit stereotypes. I think, you know, the problem with Brits abroad, and the reason why they've got such a bad reputation is the football thing. That's really where it all stems from. It's the violent side of Brits being abroad, English football fans going to different places and tearing up cities and stuff like that. Not saying that they all do it, but I think that that's where it really stems from. I think the Amsterdam thing is just definitely, and like Neil said, cutting off their nose to spite their faces. I think that, you know, Brits going there more likely to get high. The thing is with spliff and cannabis is it's not a fighting drug. Beer is a brawler, wine is a mocker, and a spliff just makes you kind of chill out. So it's not that, and it probably and it boosts up their sex tourism, because we all know that it's cannabis and the red light district. A lot of that is what Amsterdam's kind of built on and has been for many, many years. So the whole thing works hand in hand. I mean, Brits, we do like to go over and have a good time. And I say we do because I go over to Ibiza, or I go over to Magaluf. I perform in a lot of these places. And actually, it's just a good time, but it's just the violent side of things that people don't like. And sadly, that's usually connected with football hooliganism.
Oh, yeah, you can't have that. I mean, Emma, what happens to us in our heads as Brits when we go abroad? Why does our behaviour change? Because there are things that happen in Spain, Italy and France and Thailand and Prague that we wouldn't do here.
No, I don't think the behaviour does change. I think the people that... I mean, I'm not thinking about the football hooligans so much as sort of those young women, to be... you know, to put it politely, or the young men that you see, you know, doing the wet T-shirt contest and the sort of Hooters bars and literally falling all over the pavements in places, you know, resorts in Spain and stuff. But I think, actually, if we're honest, they do that in nightclubs all around the country here. It's just that, you know, it's warm weather, they're all getting drunk, they're on holiday. As Nigel says, they're getting laid. You know, they're just having fun, they're just on holiday. And, yeah, it's embarrassing behaviour, and one wouldn't want to be represented by these people as sort of representative of Brits abroad. But they're drinking too much, basically, and going out all night, and they're on holiday.
Yeah, but the thing is, Spain and the like actually love British tourists because we spend a fortune there.
We have a weird culture as well in this country. We don't sort of, as a young person, you don't go out for dinner and have some wine and talk to your friends in the way that they do. If you talk to sort of young people in Italy and France, they're sort of used to that. They're used to that culture a little bit more. I think Brits have a weird culture where you hit the age of 14 or 15 or 16 and you start going to the pub. That's what you do. And then once you can, you get into nightclubs, and that's sort of what you do. Maybe that's just my misspent youth.
No, mine too.
No, mine too.
That's what you do. You go to the pub, you get drunk, or you drink a bottle of vodka, you go to the pub, get even drunker, and then you go home.
Yeah. I do think that alcohol is, it's kind of badly introduced. So we have this binge drinking culture, which other cultures don't really have. And if you're allowed to have a little glass of wine, like they do in France, or along with meals and stuff, when you're a lot younger, then alcohol is not such a big thing. You're not thinking, oh, wow, I'm 14, I look old enough to buy alcohol. Let's go and buy some cider or whatever and let's get drunk in the park.
You just described my entire adolescence. Buy a bottle of cider, sit by the canal and drink the cider.
And also, Brits abroad, I mean, the one thing is that they feel that they're off the leash because they're on holiday, away, that the law doesn't apply to them, although they ought to really check the local laws. So off the leash and they go on the lash.
Yes.
I mean, it's just the way that young Brits behave.
But one thing, just to, you know, finally, we never talk about the massive expat community in Dubai where they're all perfectly well behaved. There's nothing going on over there. There's no problems. There's no hooliganism. There's nothing. And there is loads of expats that live over there. Loads of Brits. I think it's 300,000-400,000 or whatever that are over there. And you know, and they're very well behaved. And maybe because there's strict laws and stuff like that, so they abide by it. So it's this Brits abroad thing. Like I say, I think people just kind of, it's a bit stereotypical, and people just sort of fling it around really. And I'll always say that I really do think it's when it's violent and when there's trouble with it. That's the shocking thing that you don't want to see, and you're embarrassed to watch it on the telly and stuff.
Nigel, I do like that expression, off the leash and on the lash. That's going to be my catchphrase.
There's a headline writer for you.
Absolutely. Perfect. Fleet Street's finest, of course, Nigel Nelson and Emma Wolf and Ben Afraidu, who are back in just 2 minutes' time with tomorrow's papers. And let's have a look at all the political stuff that's kicking off on day one of Tory party conference. That's the papers next. We're having trouble getting a line to Mark Francois. We're trying to work on that. He's been hoodwinked by technology up there in the Midlands, but we're trying to get a line to Mark Francois. But lots more to come, including our quiz of the week at the end of the show as well, and your emails, mark@gbnews.uk. Papers next. See you in 2.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around with all the biggest topics and guests. You will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other pay-per-review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
This from Lewis on whether we should treat marijuana the same as Class A drugs. Lewis says if they legalise cannabis, you'd see a huge decrease in Friday night violence because many would choose to smoke a few spliffs instead of getting absolutely shit-faced. It's worth making it legal just for that, Lewis. There you go, to the point and not messing around. Brits abroad. Foreigners will say they'd rather have the happy, polite Brits than the Russians, Chinese and Arabs because they say they are rude. This according to Matthew. Brits being banned. We hear of Brits being banned, but not other nations, as other nations' citizens are of no concern to us, says Steve. If our society wasn't so repressed these attitudes, Brits would have abroad a much better time. Our culture, says David, is to binge everything until we're either sick of it or we can't stop and die young. I don't like it. I think dangerous drugs like alcohol should be illegal until 21, most likely, or even 25, when the brain stops developing. Why do we think we can afford to lose so many promising young people without at least trying to help them survive? 25-year-olds probably wouldn't even bother learning to binge drink anyway, for the most part. There you go, David, suggesting more prohibition when it comes to alcohol. Elizabeth says, Mark, Britain had licensing laws and ours for a reason. We had a terrible problem in the 18th and 19th centuries, and we've got on top of it with legislation. Then Blair came along, ignorant of the past as ever, and repealed it all, thinking we would behave like the Italians. I think you're right, Elizabeth, it didn't happen. Keep those emails coming, mark@gbnews.uk. It's exactly 10:30, and so time for tomorrow's papers, hot off the press. As always, 10:30 every Friday, Saturday and Sunday. And let's start, shall we, with The Independent. And here's front page. Gove calls on Truss to ditch tax cuts for the rich. The former Cabinet Minister, Michael Gove, has heavily criticised Liz Truss's plans for tax cuts for the rich, saying her unfunded £45 billion package had the wrong values and was not conservative. He did not rule out voting against the abolition of the 45p band. He said he was worried that Miss Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng were betting too much on tax cuts when we're borrowing to pay for them. Very much Labour's line. Also, Hamish McRae, writing in The Independent, Number 10's financial plan cannot work. Metro next, and Gove. This isn't Tory. Former Minister Michael Gove has become the latest senior Tory to attack Liz Truss's mini-budget. Cutting tax for wealthiest when people are suffering is display of wrong values. Former Minister slams using borrowed money to fund the axing of 45% rate. Gove there very much at the forefront of this blitzkrieg against Liz Truss. The newspaper, Tory rebellion builds against defiant PM. Growing revolt against Liz Truss by Conservative MPs in an attempt to stop her abolishing top rate of tax for people earning over 150k, amid fears of triggering a Labour landslide. Tory rebels believe they can force the government into a climb down after a budget backlash. Kwarteng seems to calm the markets with ironclad commitment to fiscal discipline. The Guardian, Tories threaten rebellion as Gove says tax plan is not conservative. The Daily Telegraph, Truss delays vote on 45p tax after Tory revolt. Ditching levy shows wrong values, says Michael Gove, as MPs demand to know how it will be funded. Also, hospitals scrap more than 22,000 appointments every day. We expect backlogs to rise before they fall as more patients come forward for treatment post-pandemic. Hate to say I told you so. The Daily Express now. Kwasi, no more decline. We must stay the course. Kwasi Kwarteng, the new Chancellor, will say tomorrow that we must stay the course and stick with his plan to deliver economic growth. Watered-down alternatives would leave Britain on the path of managed decline. The Chancellor will draw a line under the market turmoil of the past week with a promise that the government has an ironclad commitment to fiscal discipline. He has the full backing of the Prime Minister, Liz Truss, who says she stands by the mini-budget as she arrived at the Tory party conference in Birmingham. And last but not least for now, the Daily Star. No wonder we're loving it. Happy Meal. Beef burgers can ward off depression and make us happy. This according to Boffin's. Great news next time you get your Big Mac. And those aren't your front pages. Reacting to all of that is Ben Ofwedu, Nigel Nelson and Emma Wolfe. And let's take a look at The Guardian, their front page. Pretty bad news for this brand new government, our new Prime Minister and our new Chancellor. Let's take a look at it. Tories threaten rebellion as Gove says tax plan is not conservative. Withering words, Nigel Nelson.
Absolutely.
From somebody that's, an incredibly high-profile figure within the party.
Yes, and he seems to be leading the fight back. A lot of Tories are actually speaking privately, but they're not coming out publicly. It's been interesting to see the ones who can come out, because a lot of them are worried about losing the whip or something like that and not being able to stand as Tory MPs. But you've seen on GB News that I watched David Miller, who turned round and described the whole thing as a nightmare. We had what was the recent one?
Alan Duncan.
Alan Duncan. He was saying colossal disaster about it. So the Tories do actually hate this, and the idea.
Well, isn't it the Tory wets that hate it, just as those Tory wets hated Thatcher's economic reforms back in the 80s?
No, I don't think it's sort of wets. I mean, probably it's the One Nation group, which I suppose that Margaret Thatcher might have described as wets if they'd been around in her day. But an awful lot of MPs that I'm talking to across the whole divide do not like what has happened. They're worried about their reputation for economic competence going down the toilet. So there's worries in all sectors, apart from your small core of real sort of Truss supporters.
Yeah, the Redwoods and the Rees-Moggs.
Yeah.
And do we know what portion of the parliamentary party they make up, they represent? The sort of economically dry right of the party? About a third, maybe, of MPs?
Well, I mean, I think you look at the ones who actually voted for her in the final round in the House of Commons, and she only got a third of MPs. Yeah. If the MPs had had their way, Rishi Sunak would be Prime Minister now. So at the moment, she's got 2/3 of the party, of the parliamentary party, who didn't vote for her. These are the people she has to win over.
So there isn't a well of goodwill that she can deploy in order to sort of get through this, self-inflicted crisis. What about Rishi Sunak? He's not attending conference this year.
Which is
sensible.
Probably sensible.
Yeah.
I think that I like his tweet that he put out and says that he's not attending because he wants Liz Truss to own her moment. I think he means suffer, actually.
Yeah.
But at the moment, no, he's keeping his powder dry, and politically that's quite sensible. In the event that the Tory MPs do topple Liz Truss, Rishi Sunak's back in the frame again.
Well, surely it would be a coronation. I mean, if Liz Truss were to fall, they'd need a new leader, sharpish, wouldn't they?
They would, but I mean, they've got to change the rules to go and do that. There's, the issue comes down
not another 12 weeks.
Well, that's the problem, isn't it? That the moment the rules are, it goes out to the party membership. Now, the idea that MPs would take over and just they decide for themselves is not going to please the party membership. But equally, we can't have another leadership election so soon after the last one. And either way, you'd end up with a general election. It's the only way forward if we end up losing another prime minister.
Yeah. Emma, what do you think about this? Is Liz Truss in deep trouble? Is this an existential threat to her?
When you look at the papers over the last few days, when you look at the papers today, tomorrow's papers, but also just since last Friday's mini-budget, you have to say she's in trouble. This is the problem with not taking people with her, not talking to her cabinet about her plans. She looks isolated, she seems isolated with her Chancellor. It's very much Kwasi and Liz, isn't it?
In the bunker.
In the bunker, coming out of the bunker once in a while, popping their heads back in. I mean, I would pay money to be in Nigel's suitcase tomorrow going up to Birmingham. I think it's going to be really interesting.
I'll take the money.
Can I just come with you anyway? I think it's going to be really interesting to get the mood of MPs more widely at conference and see what the mood is more widely. Because, yes, we've had people like Michael Gove coming out. Yes, we know that Rishi Sunak's probably been on manoeuvres. I mean, everything changes so quickly. And I should think that Rishi Sunak's got his communications team back from California, and he's back making those ridiculous videos again.
Definitely. But, I mean, I think everyone's having a wobble here. The bottom line is there's been a huge overreaction to the mini-budget. The fury about the 45p tax cut for the wealthiest, it will cost either £0 or £2 billion a year, which in relative terms is very little. So that shouldn't be decisive in terms of market reaction or how it's gone down in the country. All of the other tax cuts are ones that are supported by Labour because, they actually spoke out against the hike in national insurance when it was first announced by Rishi Sunak. In the end, inflation looks like it's topped out. So panic about interest rates is unfounded.
Why do you keep saying that? What's your proof of that?
Well, this is what top economists are saying, including Professor Patrick Minford, who's the architect of Trussonomics, who said, look, the bottom line is that energy prices are coming down. Countries like America are in technical recession. Germany looks to be entering recession. The Eurozone is sinking into the red. That's anti-inflationary. And therefore, we've got to take this in perspective, that this budget also, the cost of energy is actually coming down globally. The wholesale price of energy is coming down, which is also going to correct inflation in the right direction. So we could be overreacting to a budget that's apparently uncosted, which we can easily afford.
Yeah, but the trouble is that you're then putting other inflationary pressures on. You're absolutely right. I mean, I don't think inflation has peaked, by the way, but at the moment that the price freeze on fuel should actually cut 5 points off inflation. But we're still looking at high inflation. Bear in mind that even before all this happened, we were looking at approaching 10%.
Not with major economies sinking into recession. That will be anti-inflationary, won't it?
It would, but I mean, what she's done is tax cuts are obviously inflationary.
Well, you can't have it both ways, because you said that the tax cuts won't move the dial for the economy, but now you're saying if we got the tax cuts, it's going to ramp up inflation.
They won't move the dial in a positive direction, was the point I was making.
Well, if they boost economic output, they could be inflationary, but your argument is they won't boost economic output, therefore they won't be inflationary.
No. It's not a question of actually boosting output. What tends to happen is that if you give money to people who don't need it, they go out and spend it, and that becomes inflationary. So that's the argument there. That as far as the economy goes, what the mini-budget did was add 4% to our borrowing. So suddenly, that's the reason the markets went haywire, because of the amount of money that we seem to have to borrow. That pushed interest rates up. That then made mortgages more expensive and almost wrecked the pension industry. That's what that mini-budget did.
Although this borrowing, again, it looks like an expensive budget on paper, except the wholesale cost of energy appears to be coming down. That will continue, hopefully, next year. So where they thought they they had to earmark 100 or 150 billion to help Brits with their energy bills over 2 years. It could be a fraction of that.
Well, it could be less than that. I wouldn't say a fraction of, but certainly...
It could be 30 or 40 billion rather than 150.
Well, we don't know. We'll have to see if the wholesale price of energy does come down. You're absolutely right. It is beginning to come down. But whether or not that will last, it does depend an awful lot on what happens.
A lot of ifs and buts.
Yeah.
Exactly.
But if it does come down, obviously welcome, and it might not cost so much. But bear in mind, even this 2-year plan that she's come up with, first 6 months are going to cost 60 billion.
Yes, and the other issue is it's unlimited liability, isn't it?
Yeah.
So if wholesale prices were to crank up and we can't predict that, then we're all in trouble. Ben, what are we going to do?
I just think it's whatever happened to unity? You know,
yeah, I know.
In a party, like, and the whole thing with Michael Gove, and this is going to sound really silly to me, but, you know, every time I hear his name and, you know, the way he stabbed Boris in the back, he's doing
He's
that.
at it again, isn't he?
Yeah, it just... Snake in the grass. It feels a bit like that. It feels just a bit like that. And I think to the average man walking down the street, it's Michael Gove again. What's he up to? Yes. You know, I don't think he's got a really good reputation with the general public. You know, I think
that's a really fair point. It's a significant figure.
He's a bit, you know, Caesar and Brutus, and all that. I think he sort of carries that kind of image.
And of course, he's out of the cabinet. He's out of favour with this administration. He'd love nothing more.
He was treated pretty brutally by Liz Truss, wasn't he?
Yeah. What happened?
I think she.
Well,
made
obviously, she chucked him out of the cabinet.
I think, yeah. I mean, but I think
Boris
she made it.
First.
She made it very, very clear.
Yeah,
that was.
He had to. Boris had to get rid of it.
But he's definitely got, you know, an axe to grind.
Was that an example of keep your enemies closer? Should she have given him a cabinet job?
I think Gove saying this is not conservative is going to resonate with people. I mean, OK, with the public, he's not popular, but I think that he's a respected.
But it's also nonsense. I mean, this is a low-tax budget. It couldn't be more conservative. Yeah. What's he on about?
You and Nigel are talking about the big figures and inflation and all of that. What I think is going to make a difference is when people actually see the difference in their daily lives. What I hear from people is their energy prices are going up. They're really worried about this winter, and every time they go to the supermarket, I mean, these are the things, and mortgage rates going up. These are the things that people in their daily lives encounter every day. It's all very well talking about the debt to GDP ratio and all of that stuff, and of course it matters, and then the inflationary spiral and all of that. But I think we also need to realise that politics is about people. And the average man on the street is really, really worried. Everything is going up at the moment.
Yeah.
So you may say that inflation has topped out. But let's wait and see when food prices start to stabilise and come down. Because when I go to the supermarket, everything's going up still.
But don't you think that, going back to my big opinion monologue, that love it or hate it, this was an honest budget? Because the view of this government is that we have massive spending, we've got huge commitments, welfare, health service, you name it, and that it's got to be paid for somehow. The way they want to do that is by getting us away from tax and spend and towards economic growth and away from borrowing. So really, this government is borrowing to reduce borrowing in the long run.
Yeah, but honesty would have been putting out the
OBR, publishing it properly.
That Kwasi Kwarteng had that on the first day he was in office. He chose not to publish it. One assumes the reason is the OBR is saying what other economists are and saying this is madness. So what seems to be happening now is he's putting it off until November the 23rd, and hopefully between them they can actually sort out the problems that exist with the economy. That's the one thing that might stabilise the markets, because if the OBR comes out and says you've broken your fiscal rules, the budget's not working, that'll just cause another run on the pound and markets going mad again.
And the OBR will make an interim statement next week, is that right?
Well, it doesn't look like we're going to get it. What the OBR are doing next week is that the report they gave to the Chancellor back in September was one they'd done previously. This will be based on what they've seen from these done recently, but he gets it and we don't. I think that's unsustainable, and we will see it probably fairly quickly.
Ben Afwedu, hospitals scrap more than 22,000 appointments every day. Another legacy of lockdown.
Yeah, I mean, I can't remember where I was last week, and they it was with it's with a doctor, and they were saying that there was actually in a meeting arguing where they say that they want to do more appointments on Zoom and stuff like that. You know, and it's almost like the whole world is running. Like, people don't even want to answer the phone anymore. People are hiding behind emails. You can't get email addresses. You can't contact people. You can't speak to people. Everyone's hiding for some reason. And this person was just saying he's an older doctor. I think he's about, no, he's not old, he's about 55. But he was saying he was trying to convince the young medical people, because they're all voting to, you know, let's do more on Zoom, let's do more appointments, we can get through more people that way. And there's something about, you know, seeing people in real life, especially a doctor.
I know.
You know, there's so many things that you can just pick up on because you're in the room and you say something randomly and he goes, oh, actually, it might be this or it might be that. I don't know what... It's just really weird how we've turned it into this digital kind of thing where people are just... It's like they don't care.
No, that's exactly right. I think empathy is gone, and it's a real concern. One journalist in The Telegraph a couple of weeks ago said that actually customer service has gone back about 20 years. I'd say more like 50. More from the papers next, and our quiz of the week. See you in 2.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around. With all the biggest topics and guests, you will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and tune-in apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Sunak would have been disastrous, says Dan. No surprise the lefties wanted him. Nigel Nelson's criticism of Liz is a joke. He supported Corbyn, for God's sake. Liz will be proven right, even with the snakes like Gove. Britain's future. This from Matthew. And Matthew says, Mark, it scares me when the British public can be so easily convinced that Starmer's wild and crazy claims of nationalisation, zero carbon and fairyland politics that are not financially possible or substantiated. Elizabeth says, tell Emma Chancellors don't share their budgets with the Cabinet or they might end up in the press. Though I think Emma raises a good point that at least the Cabinet could debate the principles of those policies. Look, we'll get to the papers, of course, in just a couple of minutes, but it's time now for our quiz of the week. That's right, we're going to have some fun and test your general knowledge and the general knowledge of my panel in relation to the big stories of the week. And so let's start with our question number 1. Which high-profile Conservative is missing party conference this weekend? Well, we know the answer to that. It is Rishi Sunak. How about... there you go. He's in a spin.
Oh, there he is.
Oh, wow. Oh, look, there he is.
Brilliant stuff. Our next question, number 2. Why did the Federal Supreme Court of Switzerland order thousands of little chocolate bunnies to be incinerated? What a waste, Emma.
Well, I've got no idea. They're delicious little chocolate bunnies.
Yeah, why would they melt perfectly good bunnies?
Send them over here.
Out of date, wrong time of the year?
Are they out of date? What the Christmas, right?
Yeah, well, no, I think what happened is as follows. It's a copyright issue.
Oh.
Yes, indeed. After a copyright battle, supermarket chain Lidl were ordered to destroy their stock of chocolate bunnies after the Swiss court ruled they were too similar to the Swiss brand Lindt chocolate bunny, which looks exactly the same. The court suggested they could also be melted down instead of being destroyed. So there you go. OK, next up here is your third question in our little quiz of the week. Amos Kiputro from Kenya won the men's London Marathon today, but what is the world record?
What do you mean, the time for the world record?
Yeah, exactly. What is the world record for the marathon?
It's going to be 2 hours... 15.
2 hours 15, what do you think?
2-1.
OK, I'll just go for just under 2 hours.
Well, I think the points go to Emma. 2 hours, 1 minute and 9 seconds.
Oh!
There you go.
I'm the holder.
Brilliant stuff. Hurricane Ian has destroyed the coast of West Florida. Absolutely tragic. What is the difference between a hurricane and a typhoon? Now, there's a question. Did you study GCSE geography, Ben? Any good on that?
No. Does typhoon come from the sea?
Well, you'll love this answer. No. Although it's geographic, if it's above the North Atlantic, it's a hurricane. If it hovers over the Northwest Pacific Ocean, usually East Asia, it's a typhoon. So there you go.
You've explained that and I still don't understand it.
Well, we have learned something today, anyway.
Oh, learning loads, exactly. Mainly that you didn't listen at geography. Nearly 400 people gathered in a pub in Worcestershire for a festival in a bid to revive their name that is in danger of becoming extinct. What is that name?
I know this one. Does anyone else know it?
No.
No, it's Nigel.
It is Nigel. It's a festival of Nigels. The Nigel Night Festival took place in a pub where 372 Nigels turned up to a pub for an evening of Nigel-themed refreshment and to sign the Book of Nigel. Were you there?
I was not there. I can't think of anything worse.
Has the name Nigel served you well?
No.
Why not?
Because every Nigel that turns up in the movies is a bit of a nerd, a 7-stone weakling, and they never get the girl.
All right, well, you're the opposite of all of those things.
There were no children called Nigel.
That's right, there are no Nigels anymore.
Well, you've been bucking the trend, and I think you'll...
There was Nigel Benn the boxer.
Legend.
And my sister's boyfriend, when I was very young, who I loved very much, he's like an older brother to me, was called Nigel. And there was a song called We're Only Making Plans for Nigel.
Oh, good song.
Oh, is that right?
I do know the song, yeah.
Yeah, but I'm surely, if there are any kind of Brexit fans out there, there'll be a few more Nigels in 9 months' time, won't there?
Well, you'd have thought so, but I've talked to that Nigel about it, and we think our names are actually going out of fashion, that we are extinct.
It's a shame. I'm sure they'll be back. How about our next question? This week, NASA successfully smashed a spacecraft into an asteroid. What was the name of the mission?
Smash and grab?
Sounds like it. That'd be a better name. It was DART, or Double Asteroid Redirection Test. The mission was part of NASA's pioneering planetary defense program, which prepares to protect the planet from any future apocalyptic scenarios involving asteroids. Who knew? Food prices are soaring, as we know, but what one food item has avoided this trend?
Pineapples.
No, far too delicious. Any idea? It's one of those... It's a fruit that people think is a vegetable.
Tomato?
It is tomato.
Aha.
And it's because of the extra sunny weather we had this summer, so supply is not a problem.
Okay.
Do you like tomatoes?
I do.
Really? Yeah, I can only have them in ketchup, that's about it.
I like them in things like sauces, but I'm not wild about them
on their own.
I like them in spaghetti and stuff.
OK, yeah, well, that's not a bad shout, actually. Which former comedian will be announced as a Labour prospective parliamentary candidate? Announced this week.
Eddie Izzard.
Potentially on an all-women shortlist. Who knew? At least that's the allegation. But they're not happy about that in some quarters. And Glasgow and Liverpool are in the... oh, blimey, I've just given away the answer. You see, that's what happens when you do a new format. And we don't need the question now. Blimey. TV quiz show stardom does not beckon. Look, it's been a really fascinating show. Thank you so much for my amazing panel. Please come back soon. And to you for your company. I've really enjoyed the last 3 days. And you've been such an important part of it. Do stick around. I'm doing Headliners next. And I'm in for Dan Wootton on Thursday. And Mark Dolan tonight returns on Friday at 9. See you then.
Looking ahead to tomorrow's weather, and the UK is looking dry in many places, but rain will move into Scotland and Northern Ireland. Let's take a look at those details. It will be a dry and cloudy start to the day across Scotland, but outbreaks of rain will reach the Western Isles closer to lunchtime. Rain will quickly spread into Northern Ireland on Monday morning, arriving from the west. It will turn breezy through the morning too. A few showers will spread into the coast of northwest England during the morning, but much of northern England will stay dry with some hazy sunshine. A chilly start in Wales, with a few mist and fog patches in the valleys. Skies will be largely cloudy with a few brighter spells at times. A veil of high cloud will give some hazy sunshine across the Midlands on Monday morning. It will be a chilly start with temperatures around 5 Celsius in parts of the countryside first thing in the morning. Skies are likely to be a bit brighter in East Anglia to start the day, with some mist and fog in places. However, it will turn cloudier throughout the morning. It will be a sunny start in the south of England with just a few mist and fog patches. Sunshine will turn hazy through the morning with increasing amounts of high cloud. Rain will turn rather heavy in Northern Ireland through the morning before spreading across much of Scotland in the afternoon. And that is how the weather is shaping up during tomorrow morning.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around. With all the biggest topics and guests, you will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps. On your smart